All right, everybody, a little baseball conversation, the NBA draft tonight right here on 97.3 ESPN, but we will shift our attention to baseball with Seth Everett of NBC Sports Radio, covers Major League Baseball for the 24/7 Live Sports Talk Network. You can listen at NBCSportsRadio.com. Seth, welcome back. How are you?
Hey, what's going on, man? I hope the Fanatic goes to prison for a long, long time.
In today's day and age, I thought maybe she'd sue, but I hear she's not going to sue, so the Fanatic's off. But I do hear he feels pretty bad about it.
I bet he does. I mean, he doesn't want to hurt anybody. Those people are very, very nice. I have seen. I still have a mascot story that trumps that one. I by a lot. In 1998, I was covering the All-Star game in Colorado at Coors Field. And mind you, I had just taken a job to move from Denver to Seattle, so I was out of there. And I was saying goodbye to people, going out, partying, whatever. And one of my assignments was I had to go interview an umpire. And I go to the clubhouse attendant, the stadium guy, and I said, "Hey, which was the umpire's room?" And he goes, "Oh, it's the second door on your right." Well, that was not accurate. It was like the third door on your right. The second door on your right was the mascot's changing room.
Oh, man.
And because it was the All-Star game, I saw every Major League mascot sitting in a room with their head rolling on the floor.
When I did my internship back in 1998, I had to be the mascot for the radio station, and we had that same situation. We were all at the Philadelphia Zoo, and there's a bunch of mascots all sitting in this room, all getting dressed together. I'm like, this is what my life is could potentially be right now, like a bunch of dudes hanging out in a dressing room putting mascot uniforms on. So I have witnessed something very similar to that.
Well, I'll tell you. A couple of years ago, I have two little kids, and we took them to the Fanatics' birthday party. And you know how they bring in like the Villanova guy and the Drexel mascot and all these mascots, and they brought in a bunch of Major League mascots from other teams. And all I kept saying to my wife, we were sitting in the stands, and all I kept saying to my wife was, "I've seen that guy without his head off. I've seen that guy without his head off. I've seen that guy." I'm like scarred. I can't do it. I can't do it. Also, I covered the first ever and the only, to my knowledge, mascot trade.
Wow.
When Lou Piniella agreed to his deal to get out of his Mariners contract to go to Tampa, remember he became the manager of the then Devil Rays.
Yes.
He had developed a relationship with the guy who was the Mariner Moose, and he would always talk about Tampa as a place where he wanted to move. So Lou Piniella arranged as part of his deal that the Mariner Moose goes with him, and the Mariner Moose became the Tampa Bay Devil Rays.
You only get this kind of MLB insight from insider Seth Everett here, who, by the way, here's a mascot thing for you. There's a woman who works here. I believe it's her cousin was Mr. Met.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was Mr. Met for a few years. So he might be actually listening to us right now because I think he does.
Did you see that tweet? I think it was last year when Mr. Met stuck his middle finger up at somebody.
He wasn't that Mr. Met. He was a different Mr. Met.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's what they all. That's what they all say.
Hey, Seth, the Phillies have won 7 out of 10 all of a sudden, so it seems that things are turning around up there. However, it doesn't seem that it's all peace and harmony up there, even though they're playing well.
Well, here's the thing. Baseball has an ebb and a flow. We've acknowledged that there are 3 teams that are last year's 5. Remember last year we had the 5 teams that had accelerated the rebuild program.
Yes.
It was Milwaukee and Arizona and Colorado, New York, and Minnesota. Well, this year it's Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Seattle. And it's 3. And those 3 are teams that are in kind of uncharted territory right now, because if you had gone in and had the blueprint for the season, this was a lot further than they would ever thought they were going to be so far. So what it does is I'll take the same attitude I took with those 5 teams and say it's really not right to predict. Do I think they're going to continue to play well? Sure. Do I think they're going to hit some hiccups? Yes.
Yes.
And I think we're going to get into a position where we're going to have some semblance of a problem. And my attitude has been just ride it. I go on all these markets, and the one thing I hate the question of, are they real?
Yeah.
yes, you're real, for God's sakes. But if you're going to ask me, I'm still going to pick the Nationals to win the East, even though they're struggling right now. Until they're unseeded, I'm picking them. It's the same thing with Seattle. Seattle's a great example. They're 20 games over 500, and every question is, are they real? Like, dude, the Astros won 12 in a row. Shut up.
Well, in the American League, 96% chance that Boston, Cleveland, New York, and Houston make the playoffs. I mean, those races are done out there.
Right, and then Seattle and the loser of Boston, New York will have the wild card, and that's why I think the series in New York is significant. Seattle blew a 5-0 lead, and the Yankees came all the way back, and I think it's imperative that the Mariners get one today, because if not, if my analysis is right, and I'd love to be wrong. I mean, we're splitting hairs here, but I think the Red Sox win the East, and if the Red Sox win the East, and that wild card game is Seattle at New York, I'm telling you right now, that'll be in their heads. You know what I mean? So I think that today is an important game to avoid that kind of thing. The Red Sox, I could be wrong. I mean, we're splitting hairs. It might come down to the final weekend, but again, gun to my head, I'm going to pick the Red Sox to win the division.
Seth Everett on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline talking baseball with us from NBC Sports Radio. I heard a comment the other day. I mean, obviously here, the way the Phillies use their bullpen is just bizarre. I was talking with Jason Stark last week, and he said, the way that we view roles, they don't view them the same way. Like, essentially, they don't have a closer. There's no, eighth inning setup man. But I heard a comment, someone say, I believe it was on the MLB Network, that said, if the save rule was never created, this is how everyone would use their bullpen, and there wouldn't be any questions. Is that point valid?
I think it's fair. I think that, the evolution of all of this sabermetric world that we're living in, I think eventually every starter is going to go 4 innings, maybe 5. You're never going to let a pitcher face through the lineup more than twice. Because the numbers show that it's the third time through the lineup whenever you get beat.
How can these bullpens hold up like that, though?
But, they're also going to try to expand rosters, and you're going to see a change in roles. It's not going to be reliever. It's going to be you're going to be designated middle starter or something like that. Like, you'll see a change. And I don't think it's changed for the better.
No.
I don't think it's an enjoyable thing to see. But again, that's not what my job is.
No.
My job is to call it like I see it, and I see there's going to be a change in the way pitching is done, and they're also going to say that it's going to help arms, and you'll have less injuries, because that's another problem is the proliferation of Tommy John surgery. So the thought process is if everybody has shorter outings, would you be able to preserve arms longer?
I'm not sure I agree with that. But we can talk about that on another day.
I'm not saying we should agree with it. I'm saying that this is part of the theory. This is also the same sport that tells you launch angle is more important than contact.
Right, which brings me over. I know you were talking with the people out in Milwaukee about this Nightingale piece over at USA Today. Baseball's terrible. It's only getting worse. About just that, like the teams that are the.
I didn't say that.
That's the title of the article, not from your.
Yeah, okay.
That was Nightingale's article, but you guys were discussing that out there, and I read it the other day, and it's like the best teams in the league. I think Arizona's hitting 227. Milwaukee struck out more than anybody. They're in first place. I mean, it just seems that the product and the attendance is all showing it, and it's like this combustible force is just going to blow up at some point, and it's just not good.
Well, I'll tell you this. I was at Shinnecock last week, and I was sitting in the media center talking to a couple of reporters, and I did a podcast, a really fun podcast with a reporter for the Boston Globe. And this question came up, and I'll ask it to you and your audience. If you could inherit one commissioner's job, you could inherit either. You inherit their problem. Would you rather be Roger Goodell or Rob Manfred? Hands down, you'd pick Roger Goodell. Hands down, you'd pick Goodell, because you would have to argue, and I'm sorry if I'm going to open up a Pandora's box, but you would have to argue that a majority of the NFL's problems are fixable.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
They exist because of some yim-yam and a bad reaction. Whereas in baseball, Rob Manfred's problems, I don't know how he stops them.
I agree.
I don't have the solution. And I think that when you talk to guys like Bob Nightingale and Jason Stark, two guys who I consider friends and I have worked with in the past. And, these guys are seeing this sport. And what we're trying to figure out is how do I make compelling content surrounding by this sport? I see the articles. I see the stuff. I see the statistics. There is empirical data.
Yeah.
And now it's 6.5%, a 15-year low. And Rob Manfred's response is, it's bad weather. It's not. It's more than that.
Well, the article's really good. He mentions in there that he says you're a hero when you take a pitch that's an eighth off the plate and you draw a walk. Strikeouts used to be the ultimate embarrassment, and that's we're seeing relievers start games, legitimate starters pitch 5 1/3. Shifts are on every pitch. The hit and run is obsolete. The game is certainly changing. And you're right. I don't know how Manfred changes. I don't know what this whole conversation about getting rid of the shifts. I don't even think that's fair to do. I mean, who's to tell somebody how to run their defense?
Well, Stark's piece, from a month ago, from Memorial Day, was about. He said that the shift could be one of the origins of the launch angle statistic, and that
yes, I spoke to him about that.
Creation was to dare you. Right, the shift's idea was to dare you to bunt to the opposite field. So if you're a lefty power hitter, we'll give you a little bunt base hit. What we don't want is for you to drive the ball. And that's where launch angle became a big thing. And I think there's credence to that. I don't know if it's a scientific theorem. Jason's a smart guy, but I think there's legitimacy to the argument. However, now that you're in this position where they teach this on the minor league level, what's the solution?
They're teaching it on a lower level than that too, Seth, by the way. You got 13-year-olds. I coach baseball, and they're telling me, oh, I'm being taught launch angle. I'm saying, that's great, but you're 13. You can't hit the ball over the fence.
Awful. That's awful. That's contact. It's supposed to be about contact. And, I reiterate the story I think I've told you in the past. When I used to do a show with a guy named Billy Sample, Billy played in the late 70s, early 80s, and he just tells this great story. He says that on those 70s Rangers teams, Texas Rangers, if you struck out, you were not allowed to utilize the services of the bat boy. That you had to carry your own bat back to the dugout in shame. Now if you strike out and it's a 9-pitch at bat and you burn 9 pitches off the starting pitcher, they high-five you.
I did read in that article that the National League will have the DH within the next 5 years. Say it ain't so?
Well, I think there's a chance for radical realignment. I think we could see – this is actually something I don't hate, even though, if I'm a traditionalist, there's so many things that have changed. So I don't know, if traditional baseball will ever coexist again. But what I would predict is if you add teams or if you relocate teams, I could see getting rid of the National League and American League and making an Eastern Conference and a Western Conference, kind of like the other sports, so that you would have, a division where the Mets, the Yankees, the Phillies, the Orioles would all be in the same division, and it would go throughout. And then in that case, you'd have to make it universal because you wouldn't have one set of rules for the eastern part of the country versus the western part of the country. That's the only way I see that. I do not think the National League will adopt the DH. I think if you get rid of the National League, that's a different story.
Gotcha. He's Seth Everett, everybody, here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. You can hear him more on NBC Sports Radio. He covers Major League Baseball, the 24/7 live sports talk network, which you can listen at NBCSportsRadio.com. Apparently covers Mascots as well, and he appeared here on the Sports Bash. Seth, enjoy your weekend, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for doing this.